I was deadheading the roses along the back fence when my phone buzzed. I almost didn't answer. My hands were dirty. My knees ached the way they always do in October, and I figured it was my neighbor Patricia asking again if I'd seen her cat. I pulled off one garden glove and looked at the screen. One word from my daughter. Mom. That was all. Just that one word. But something in me went cold, the way a house goes cold when the furnace dies in the middle of the night. You don't hear anything. You just feel it. I called her back immediately. It rang 4 times and I was already pulling off the other glove, already walking toward the back door when she picked up. Mom. Her voice was barely there. A thread of a thing. Naomi, where are you? A sound that might have been a breath or might have been a sob. Then, I'm in the parking garage. Downtown. Level 2. I can't. Mom, I can't drive. I didn't ask questions. I grabbed my keys off the hook by the kitchen door, the ones with the little brass sunflower my late husband Earl gave me the year we moved into this house, and I drove. I found her sitting on the concrete floor between her car and the wall, her back against the driver's side door, knees pulled to her chest. She was wearing the green cardigan I'd given her for her birthday, and it was torn at the shoulder. Her left cheekbone was swollen and dark. There was dried blood at the corner of her mouth. I knelt down beside her, concrete be damned, and I took her face in both my hands. Tell me you don't need an ambulance right now, I said. Tell me that first. She shook her head. No ambulance. Please. Okay. I kept my voice steady. I've had 63 years of practice keeping my voice steady when everything inside me is screaming. Okay. Can you stand? It took us a while. She was stiff and she was ashamed. I could see the shame on top of the pain, and that made me angrier than the bruise did. She shouldn't have been ashamed of one single thing in that parking garage. But we got her up, and I got her into my car, and I put her seatbelt on for her like she was 5 years old again, and I drove us home. She didn't speak for the first 10 minutes. I let the silence sit. I've learned that silence is sometimes the only dignified thing you can offer someone. Then she said, "It was Diane." I kept both hands on the wheel. "Your mother-in-law. She came to the apartment this morning. Marcus was at work. She said she needed to talk to me alone." Naomi's voice was careful, the way you talk when your mouth hurts. I let her in. I made coffee, and then she said, she stopped. "Take your time." She said that Marcus deserved better than me, that she had told him so from the beginning, that our children, her voice broke then, just for a moment, that any children we had would be confused, damaged, because of what I am. The traffic light ahead of me turned red and I stopped. "She said that to you." "She said a lot of things, Mom. She's been saying a lot of things for 3 years, just never to my face, always through Marcus, always sideways, but today she said them to my face." Naomi looked out the passenger window, and when I told her to get out of my apartment, she didn't like that. I looked at my daughter's swollen cheekbone, at the torn cardigan, at her hands in her lap, fingers twisted together. "She did that to you. She grabbed me when I tried to walk to the door. I fell against the counter." A pause. "She said I deserved whatever happened to me, that women like me always did." The light turned green. I drove. I didn't say anything for another long moment because what I had to say was not fit for words, and some things need to settle before you act on them. My mother taught me that. She used to say, "Margaret, the first thought in your head belongs to the devil. The second thought belongs to you. Wait for the second one." I waited until I pulled into my driveway. I put the car in park. And then I said, "Does Marcus know?" Naomi was quiet. Naomi. I called him on the way to the parking garage. I told him what happened. She finally turned to look at me. Her eyes were dry now. That worried me more than tears would have. He said his mother wouldn't do something like that on purpose, that I probably provoked her without realizing it. I breathed in slowly through my nose. He said I provoked her. Yes. I got out of the car, walked around to her side, and opened her door. "Come inside," I said. "I'll get you some ice." I cleaned up her cheek at the kitchen table while the kettle heated. The swelling wasn't as bad as I'd feared, but there was a small cut at the corner of her eye that needed butterfly strips. My hands were steady. I've held steadier hands than Marcus's mother ever would. While I worked, Naomi told me the rest of it. Diane Holloway was 61 years old and had been widowed for a decade, and in that decade she had made Marcus her entire world and her entire project. He was her only son. He was, in her words that had come back to Naomi through Marcus over 3 years of marriage, not meant to have ended up with a woman like my daughter. Diane had smiled at the wedding. She had sent a beautiful crystal bowl as a gift, but the words kept coming, quiet and steady, like water wearing down stone. She's not what I imagined for you. Her family is so different from ours. Don't you think she's a little too independent? I just worry about the children, Marcus. I just think about what they'll face. Naomi had tried. Lord knows she had tried. She had invited Diane to Sunday dinners and called her on her birthday and admired her garden and kept her mouth shut for 3 years about every sideways comment and every pointed silence. She had done what women are told to do when they marry into a family that has decided not to want them. She had made herself smaller and quieter and more agreeable, and none of it had worked, because the problem was never anything Naomi did. The problem was what Naomi did. The problem was what Naomi was. And Diane had finally said so out loud that morning before she put her hands on my daughter. "What are you going to do?" Naomi asked me as I pressed the last butterfly strip into place. "Right now, I'm going to make you tea," I said, "and then I'm going to call your Uncle Darnell." She looked up at me. "Mom, just tea first," I said, "then we'll talk. Darnell is my younger brother by 4 years. He spent 22 years as a police detective in this city before he retired, and he knows more about how things work and how to make things work than anyone I have ever met. He also loves Naomi like she is his own, and when I called him and told him what had happened, the line went very quiet for a moment. "How bad is her face?" he asked. "Butterfly strips and bruising, no fractures as far as I can tell." "Did she go to a doctor?" "Not yet. She didn't want to. She needs to go." His voice was measured, but I could hear what was underneath it. I'd known that voice for 59 years. "Tonight, Margaret, she needs it documented." "I know. And I need to ask you something before we go any further. Does she want to pursue this, or does she want to let it go?" I looked at Naomi sitting at my kitchen table with both hands wrapped around her mug of tea, staring at the grain of the wood, and I thought about what she had told me on the drive home, that she had spent 3 years being smaller, that she had kept her mouth shut, that she had made coffee for a woman who came into her home and called her children she didn't even have yet, damaged. "Go ahead and come over," I said to Darnell. "I think she wants to tell you herself." Darnell arrived within the hour. He sat down across from Naomi at the kitchen table, and he looked at her face without flinching, and then he looked her in the eye. "I'm going to tell you exactly what your options are," he said, "and then it's your choice. Not mine, not your mother's, yours." Naomi nodded. "What Diane Holloway did this morning is a crime, assault and battery. The bruising, the cut, the torn clothing, all of that is evidence. If you go to urgent care tonight and have it documented, and if you are willing to make a statement, then she can be charged." He folded his hands on the table. "She is 61 years old with no prior record. She would probably not see jail time. She might see probation, a fine, mandatory anger management, but it would be on her record, and it would be real." Marcus said. Naomi started. I know what Marcus said. Darnell's voice didn't change. "I'm not talking about Marcus right now. I'm talking about you." She was quiet for a long moment. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside a car passed. "What about the other things she said?" Naomi asked. "The things about my children, about what I am." "Those aren't crimes," he said, "ugly as they are, but they tell us something about who we're dealing with." He paused. "There are other ways to handle the other things. Legal, careful ways that don't require you to do anything you're not comfortable with. But step 1 is tonight, at urgent care, with documentation." Naomi looked at me. "I'll drive you," I said. She looked back down at the table, and then she straightened her spine the way I have watched her straighten her spine since she was 9 years old, and learning that the world was not always going to be fair, and she said, "Okay." The urgent care physician was a quiet woman named Dr. Tullis Puddle, who took photographs and asked her questions in a gentle, unhurried voice and wrote everything down. She gave Naomi a cream for the bruising and told her she was lucky there were no fractures. Naomi said thank you in a voice that was very controlled and didn't speak again until we were in the parking lot. 3 years, she said. I know. 3 years I kept quiet because I thought if I was patient enough and kind enough, it would eventually. She stopped, shook her head. It doesn't work that way, does it? No, I said. It doesn't. Marcus had called twice while we were inside. Naomi looked at his name on her screen for a moment and then put the phone in her purse. When we got back to my house, Darnell was still there at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad, and he had clearly been busy. He looked up when we came in. "Sit down," he said. "I want to tell you what I found out this afternoon." What Darnell had found out was this. Diane Holloway was not simply a grieving widow with strong opinions about her son's marriage. For the past 2 years, she had been involved in a civil dispute with a former business partner, a dispute that had recently gone to judgment against her. She owed a significant amount of money. She had been, according to courthouse records that are entirely public, attempting to protect her remaining assets. She owned one significant asset, the house she lived in, which was also, and this was the part that made Naomi go very still, the house that Marcus had co-signed a loan on 18 months ago, without fully explaining the situation to Naomi. He signed a loan, Naomi said slowly, to help her refinance, Darnell said. His name is on it, which means if she defaults, it affects his credit, and potentially more than that, depending on the structure of the agreement. He tapped his legal pad. I'm not your attorney, and I'm not giving you legal advice. But I am telling you that you have more information now than you had this morning, and information is how you protect yourself. Naomi stared at him. Did he know? When we got married, did he know? I don't know that, Darnell said simply. But you could ask him, and this time I'd recommend asking him with your own attorney present. She stayed with me that night. I made up the guest room the way my mother used to make up rooms for people in trouble. Extra blanket, glass of water on the nightstand, nightlight in the hallway so you don't wake up disoriented in the dark. I sat on the edge of the bed while she settled in, the way I used to when she was small. Are you scared? I asked. Yes, she said, but not the same kind of scared as this morning. She pulled the blanket up. This morning I was scared because I didn't understand what was happening. Tonight I'm scared because I do understand what was happening. Tonight I'm scared because I do. That's the better kind, I said. Is it? The kind where you know what you're dealing with is the kind you can do something about. I smoothed the edge of the blanket the way my hands still remember how to do after all these years. Your grandmother used to say, once you can name the thing loses half its power. Naomi was quiet for a moment. What did she call it? When people decided that something was wrong with you before they ever knew you? I thought about my mother, about the things she had named in her lifetime with quiet, precise fury. She called it their poverty, I said, because that's what it is, a poverty of imagination, an inability to see anything they haven't already decided. My daughter looked at the ceiling. Diane looked at me across that kitchen table, and she was so certain, she said. 3 years and she had never actually looked at me. I was just a category. Yes, I said, and that's her loss, even if she never knows it. The following days moved with a different kind of speed. Naomi went home to the apartment once, with Darnell waiting downstairs to collect what she needed. Marcus was there. The conversation was not shouting. Naomi told me it was almost worse than shouting, because it was very quiet and very careful, and by the end of it she understood that he had known about the loan. Not when they married. About a year after. He had told himself it was a small thing, a temporary thing, a thing that would resolve itself. He had not told her because he had not wanted conflict with his mother. "Did he apologize?" I asked. "He said he was sorry I felt that way," Naomi said. I nodded. "There is a particular kind of apology that is actually an accusation, and she and I both recognized it. She found an attorney the following week, a woman named Claire DeVoe, who had been recommended by 3 different people Darnell trusted. Claire DeVoe had short natural hair and wire-rimmed glasses, and she sat across from Naomi and listened without interrupting for a very long time. And when Naomi was done, she said, "You're in a stronger position than you think. Let me show you why." I didn't go to most of those meetings. That was intentional. This was Naomi's life and Naomi's decisions, and I had learned long ago that the most important kind of support is the kind that stands behind someone, not in front of them. But I was there when she needed me to be. Diane Holloway was served with papers 3 weeks after the morning in the parking garage. The assault charge. Darnell had helped Naomi write her statement clearly and completely, and the documentation from Dr. Patel was thorough. The look on Diane's face when she was served. Naomi wasn't there for it. She had no reason to be. But a mutual acquaintance mentioned it later, was apparently one of complete disbelief. She had spent 61 years believing that her certainties protected her. She had never considered that they might become evidence. Marcus called me once during that period. I answered because I am not a person who avoids difficult conversations. "I want you to know that I love Naomi," he said. "I believe you believe that," I said. A pause. "That's not the same thing as believing me." "No," I said. "It isn't. Love is a verb, Marcus. It's not a feeling you have. It's a choice you make every day. And for 3 years, you made a different choice." He didn't have an answer for that. "I hope," I said carefully, "that you find your way to making better ones." "I genuinely do. But that's between you and my daughter now, and it has nothing to do with me." The civil case took time. The way things that matter tend to take time. What Claire DeVoe had found, methodically and without drama, was that the refinancing arrangement Marcus had signed onto was structured in a way that created real liability exposure. There were options, she explained, that would allow Naomi to protect herself entirely, to separate her interests cleanly from what Marcus had attached himself to without her knowledge. It was not simple. It was not quick. But it was possible. And possible, as my mother used to say, is all you need. Diane's assault charge resulted in a plea deal in the 4th month. Misdemeanor assault, 1-year probation, mandatory counseling. She stood in a courtroom and entered her plea, and Naomi sat in the gallery and watched, and I sat next to my daughter and held her hand, and neither of us said a word. Afterward, in the parking lot of the courthouse, Naomi stood for a moment in the thin November sunshine with her eyes closed. "That's not enough," she said quietly. "No," I agreed, "it isn't. But it's something. It's documentation," I said. "It's her name on a record. It's a judge who looked at what she did and said, this happened, and it was wrong, and there are consequences." I looked at my daughter's profile against the pale sky. Sometimes that's what justice looks like. Not satisfaction, just acknowledgement. She opened her eyes. Did Grandma ever get acknowledgement? I thought about my mother for a long moment, about the things she had named, about the quiet precision of her fury and the grace she had carried it with. "Sometimes," I said. "Not always." But she always said that the point wasn't whether they acknowledged it. The point was that she knew, that she had it straight in her own mind what was true and what was not. I squeezed her hand. "Nobody can take that from you. Not Diane, not Marcus. Nobody." Naomi moved into a small apartment 2 miles from my house in December. It has good light in the mornings, which she said was the main thing she was looking for. She put her grandmother's quilt on the bed and her books on shelves. She built herself, and she bought a small table with 2 chairs that sits by the window where the morning light comes in. She's been seeing Claire DeVoe about the financial matters, and they are, Claire says, progressing well. She's been seeing a therapist on Tuesday evenings, a soft-spoken man named Dr. Webb, who Darnell's wife recommended, and she says it is hard and useful in equal measure. She came to my house for Sunday dinner 3 weeks after she moved in, and she brought a bottle of wine and a pie she had made herself. And she sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had put butterfly strips on her cheekbone 2 months before, and she laughed at something Darnell said, and the laugh was real and went all the way up to her eyes. I have memorized that laugh. I have been memorizing things about my daughter her whole life, the way you memorize the face of someone you love, so that no matter what comes, you have it stored somewhere safe. Darnell helped himself to a second piece of pie and looked across the table at Naomi and said, "You know what your grandmother would have said about all of this?" "What?" Naomi asked. "She would have said, 'Took you long enough.'" He grinned. She had no patience for prolonged suffering. Naomi laughed again, and then her eyes got a little bright, the way eyes do when something is funny and sad at the same time and you're feeling both at once, and she looked down at her plate and then back up. "I kept thinking," she said, "that if I just waited long enough, she would come around. That people change." "People do change," Darnell said. "But not on your schedule," I said, "and not just because you've been patient. No." Naomi looked at her wine glass. "Not just because of that." We sat at the table for a long time that evening, the three of us, the way families do when there is no particular reason to rush. When the food is good and the company is good and outside, it is cold and dark, but inside the kitchen light is warm and steady. Darnell told stories about cases he'd worked that he was finally able to find funny at this distance. I told the story about the time Naomi at age 7 had informed her kindergarten teacher that she was statistically unlikely to be correct, and the teacher had called me, and I'd had to try very hard not to laugh on the phone. Naomi hid her face in her hands. "Mom, it was one of the proudest moments of my life," I said. "I told your father that night and he laughed until he cried." She looked up at me, smiled. "He would have known what to do," she said. "He always knew what to do." She said, "He always knew what to do." "No, he didn't," I said. "He just never let you see him figure it out." I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. "Just like his daughter." It is February now, and the roses along the back fence are just bare canes, patient and dark against the weathered wood. In a few months, they will be something again. That is the thing about roses that I have always appreciated. They are much harder to kill than they look, and every year they come back with more determination than the year before. My phone buzzes on the kitchen counter. I look at the screen, a photograph from Naomi. The morning light coming through her new window, falling across the table with its 2 chairs, a cup of coffee steaming in the frame. Underneath, 3 words. "Good morning, Mom." I look at that photograph for a long moment, at that ordinary light in my daughter's new apartment, at the evidence of her ordinary Thursday morning. Then I type back, "Good morning, my love." I put the kettle on. Outside the kitchen window, the sky is the particular pale blue of a February morning that intends to become something warmer by afternoon. The roses are still bare, but I know what's in them. I have always known what's in them. I put on my coat and go out to check.